Welcome to Movies Are Life. I'm your host, Nathan Chandler. Today we are covering the number 7 film on the 50 best rom-coms list, Sleepless in Seattle. And much like the movie, I am separated by miles from today's caller, Miles Kelly. How are you doing, Miles?
That's a good pun. I like it. I'm doing well. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing well. So Miles is in South Carolina and I'm in Oklahoma. And just through the magic of technology, we're able to talk about this splendid film.
Yes, I know. I was like, when you said, I was like, number seven. Like, are there 6 better rom-coms than Sleepless? I don't think so.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, I
think there might be one better rom-com than Sleepless.
Yeah. I definitely think this is a film, and we can get more into it. But I think if you throw it out there, even tonight, I was with my family eating dinner, and I was talking about, hey, we're going to record this conversation about Sleepless in Seattle. And they all, not rehearsed, went, oh.
Like it's that kind of movie, right?
Yeah. Miles and I met our freshman year at Baylor. Miles and his other 2 roommates, I think it was the prime spot in one of the dorms in Penland Hall. And it was like right by this side entrance door that everybody came in and out of. And I might be remembering this wrong, but I feel like you all had your door open pretty much all the time if one of you were there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So we, very social room, and so that's how I got to know all you guys. And Kyle Radford was one of your roommates who has obviously been on this podcast a lot, and Brian became one of my best friends as well.
Did you move into the apartment junior year? Oh, so you and I swapped spots in the apartment as well, right?
Yeah. I replaced you. I had a lot to live up to.
You brought I'm positive you brought a much better vibe to that apartment than I did. I think I think it was probably time for me to go. The people living downstairs from us probably really appreciated it.
Yeah. No, that was a great apartment. But I also credit you all to introducing me to a lot of movies, including Swingers. And so I think it's fair to say you've had a pretty big influence on my life.
Maybe one of my favorite movies of all time. Definitely on my top 10 list. Maybe number 1. Like, Swingers continues to be a favorite. And is Swingers a rom-com?
Possibly. Well,
possibly, right?
Yeah.
We were talking like what is the definition? And I guess it's not really, but you could maybe think of it that way.
I think so, especially compared to some of the other films on the list. But
the list is now I actually want to bring up the list again just because I'm forgetting what was on it. But I had issues with like some of the movies on there.
Okay. Well, before we get too deep into it, let's jump into Sleepless in Seattle.
Yes, good call.
If you've just tuned in, we're talking to Sleepless in Seattle.
You called a radio station? Christmas Eve. He phones in one of those radio call-in shows. He tells them
that his dad needs a new wife.
And this shrinkette practically forces a guy onto the phone and says,
"Tell me, what was so special about your wife?"
Well, Dr. Marcia Fieldstone, I think it was like magic.
Sleepless in Seattle?
That's what you called him on the show because he can't sleep.
Sleepless in Seattle is a 1993 American romantic comedy drama film directed by Nora Ephron from a screenplay she wrote with David S. Ward and Jeff Arch. Starring Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, the film follows a journalist, Ryan, who, despite being newly engaged, becomes enamored with a recently widowed architect, Hanks, when his son calls into a talk radio program requesting a new partner for his grieving father. In addition to Bill Pullman, Ross Malinger, and Rob Reiner, the film features an ensemble supporting cast also consisting of Rosie O'Donnell, Gabby Hoffman, Victor Garber, and Rita Wilson. Sleepless in Seattle was released on June 25th, 1993 to positive reviews, receiving praise for Ephron's writing and direction, as well as Hanks and Ryan's performances. The film was nominated for 2 Academy Awards at the 1994 ceremony, Best Original Screenplay and Best Original Song. Despite competition from several blockbusters released around the same summer, the film was a surprise commercial success, earning $17 million during its opening weekend, the highest opening for a romantic comedy at the time, and ultimately grossing over $227 million worldwide. It was one of the highest grossing films of 1993 and remains one of the most successful romantic comedies in box office history. The soundtrack was also successful, peaking at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Several critics and media publications agree that Sleepless in Seattle is one of the greatest romantic comedy films of all time. This film is also credited with establishing Ephron as one of the most celebrated romantic comedy filmmakers. Okay, so Miles, you said that you hold this in pretty high esteem. So
I do,
have you
yeah.
seen this movie a lot?
Well, so real quick, a side note, the other writers that you mentioned, I just thought this was funny. I didn't know this until recently. Jeff Arch and David S. Ward, the screenwriters of The Sting, starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford.
Oh.
So that's kind of where they made their bread and butter. And then this movie, Sleepless in Seattle, was originally thought up by Arch, I believe, who got the idea after watching, and why am I going to forget the name? An Affair, no.
Yeah, An Affair to Remember.
An Affair to Remember, right?
Yeah.
The one that they're watching, that they keep watching in Sleepless in Seattle. He was inspired by that and wrote this romantic drama where the two lead characters don't meet until the end.
Yeah.
And surprise, surprise, no one wanted to make it. He took it around Hollywood, and everybody's like, why would we ever do that? And then Nora Ephron got her hands on it, and yeah, cashed in her credibility from When Harry Met Sally, and got it made.
Yeah, man, you're bringing the trivia and the history to this.
Yeah, well, it's, I discovered that just going back to this movie, right? Because you asked, like, have I seen it a lot? And the answer is sort of.
Yeah.
Like, I think I first saw it when I was about 16, right? I didn't see it in theaters.
Yeah.
But saw it on video, obviously video cassette tape. And saw it at home, and even as a teenager was totally enamored of it. I just thought it was amazing. Even from then, it probably would have been on, my top 10, top 20 favorite movies of all time.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I think definitely it's been a long time since I've seen this movie. And like you probably was just saw it just in the moment a lot when it came out. And I don't know if I've seen it a lot since then, but there's a lot of things. So watching it this time, a lot of it was new to me, but a lot was also very, very familiar as well. And I think maybe part of that was probably when the age that we watched it. This has a PG rating, so I feel like maybe this was like kind of like, as far as the family goes, like, this is a romantic comedy we can all watch. And
yeah. It's funny too, because as a teenager, it had been probably 15 years at least since I've seen it before now, right? So I watched it a lot back then, but then hadn't seen it for probably 15 years until, we were going to do this. And so I went back and rewatched it. And it is very different as a married person with children than it is as a teenager, right? Just the opening scene, mommy got sick. It's like, just like rip your heart out.
Yeah, I agree.
Standing by her grave in front of the Chicago skyline. It's very different as a father, because it just puts you in a very different spot. And it's kind of crushing that I would never have really remembered from watching it as a teenager, because as a teenager, you're like, death, what's that? Having to raise a child by yourself after your wife dies, that seems fine. Yeah.
Well, I would say probably the big appeal to this film, I'd say appeal, a single father and his son, but it really is the interaction, I think, between Hanks and his son in this movie, Jonah, played by Ross Malinger, who was also kind of at that time probably like one of those kids you saw a lot. But
he's a great child actor.
Yeah, I think a lot hinges on their relationship and their quote unquote chemistry in this movie, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. You totally buy their relationship.
Yeah.
And Hanks is so good at that, right? Hanks is so good at that really natural, like he's got some sarcasm with him, and they just have this very natural relationship. That is really probably the core of the movie.
Yeah. And I would say that one thing that probably if I had seen this, or when I saw this before having kids, I would have maybe even kind of thought like, man, they sure do have a pretty like open, honest, like conversation, they have these open conversations with each other. That kind of seems a little unbelievable. But honestly, having kids now and then thinking about even like if it was just me and them, like for like I feel like the relationship between the father and son would grow probably a little bit more mature than what it naturally would in a kind of quote unquote normal family unit. Does that make sense?
It totally does, right? It would sort of have to almost, just if you're gonna get through that in a way. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Totally.
you feel like once you've gone through something like that, with the passing away of a spouse, that you just have to kind of cut through the BS and just, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna just have to tell my kid what life is like, because if he's experienced this, like, how are you going to sugarcoat things?
Oh, exactly. Yeah, yeah. After that, it's just kind of like the worst thing possible has happened to you. Let's try to move on.
Yeah. Have you have you seen An Affair to Remember, which this movie is based on, as you had mentioned, but also a film they reference quite a bit? Have you seen that movie
I have
before?
not actually. Have you?
It's once again, it's been a long time, but I remember seeing it because of this movie, and I don't remember a lot from it, but I do remember that An Affair to Remember is a pretty straightforward like romance film. Like there's not much comedy to it. It is just all the feelings with Cary Grant and Deborah Carr in it. So, or Deborah Kerr.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I think that's kind of why, often I don't think of Sleepless in Seattle as a rom-com, right?
Mhm.
As it's more of, like we said, the base of it is this tragedy. And that's really what kind of moves the story forward, is this terrible tragedy that's happened to him. So even though there obviously is a lot of comedy, like we were mentioning before, right? Once you get to the Meg Ryan part of it, there's a lot of oddball sort of comedy happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as the Tom Hanks side of the movie, it's really just a devastating drama. That
Yeah.
then, when he tries to start dating and things, right, they bring the comedy in at a certain point there. But yeah, I think in my head, it's almost that I don't think of it as much as a rom-com, which it is, Nora Ephron, the queen of rom-com. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. In my head, I almost don't think of it that way, because there's more depth there than even a When Harry Met Sally, right?
Mhm.
Which is, maybe the best rom-com ever made.
Yeah.
But it is the thrust of When Harry Met Sally is will they, won't they,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And that to me is the rom-com formula, is watching two people who you think should be together, but will they or won't they?
Right. Yeah. And I think Efron is definitely probably really is doing something different in this film, because I pulled this quote from her. It says, she said, quote, "Our dream was to make a movie about how movies screw up your brain about love. And then if we did a good job, we would become one of the movies that would screw up people's brains about love forever." And I think that's great because,
Yeah.
not only referencing An Affair to Remember, which I think in itself, which is, I think was kind of unique for a time for a quote unquote romantic comedy, but very much, well, I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more later, but the soundtrack I think is evoking, I think the music's wonderful in here, but it's invoking this like sentimentality throughout the film. It's almost like it's so blatant in how it's doing it that you're okay with it. You kind of go along for the
Oh
ride.
yeah, it's just so earnest, the soundtrack.
Yes.
And another weird thing, my mom had the soundtrack and
Yes.
played it in our house repeatedly. And so the
Yeah.
soundtrack really became a part of my childhood.
Oh, for
And so
sure.
there's even extra sentimentality there as far as the soundtrack goes.
Yeah, me also, and I would say my parents weren't someone who had like this extensive like music CD collection,
Oh no, not at all. Yeah.
but Sleepless in Seattle was one of them. And so when I
Mhm.
was pulling up that, writing the intro for this thing, and I I read that it hit #1 on the charts, I was like, oh, that completely makes sense, because it was definitely a soundtrack of my childhood. Like re-listening to it before recording this podcast, I know all the songs.
Oh, absolutely, right. And they are classics, right? Like you said, they're constantly evoking this kind of classical sense of romanticism, sort of, right? Like Wink and a Smile
Hmm.
and Bye Bye Blackbird, and yeah, it's just, yeah, the whole thing is amazing as far as the soundtrack goes, and it's constantly evoking a sense of that.
Just imagining both the concept of like losing, you know, I hate to even say it, losing my wife, but you know, just kind of trying to raise a kid by yourself, but then also even trying to grasping getting back into the dating world. I think I think Efron does a good job of like, you know, those are two very different things, but it's a natural kind of stage of life that happens, and so it's very interesting. Hank's journey through this thing versus, you know, I keep saying Hanks plays Sam and Meg Ryan plays Annie. It almost feels.
I always just refer to them as Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, at a certain point, the actor is bigger than the parts that they play. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, right?
Right, exactly. So, but yeah, did you connect with those feelings at all of like, oh man, I'm just glad I'm not in these characters' places.
Oh yeah, and then you know what's hilarious about the dating thing too is, I mean, you could make that movie again today.
Yes,
and you'd say the exact same thing, right? You know, he would have to get on an app now, and you know that would also be torture. But yeah, some of the dialogue with him and Rob Reiner as well, like in the bar, the tiramisu thing is hilarious.
Tiramisu.
What is tiramisu?
You'll find out.
Well, what is it?
You'll see.
Some woman is going to want me to do it to her, and I'm not going to know what it is.
You'll love it.
That dialogue is so great. Yeah, you could make the same exact situation today. I'm sure they do, right? I'm sure romantic comedies have that I'm just not thinking of. But exact same setup, and you'd get the exact same thing. So there's kind of a universality to it almost, right? Like, and that was something that was great rewatching it 15 years later, is just, it holds up.
It does. It really does. Yeah. We've talked about Hanks a lot. Do you like Meg Ryan in this movie?
Oh, Meg Ryan in this movie was peak Meg Ryan.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You either want to be her best friend or you want to marry her. And there is no other option. It's one of those two, right? It's that same When Harry Met Sally. She plays weird, quirky characters, but just with so much charm.
Yeah, there's definitely a certain class about her, I think, for sure.
Yes. Oh, for sure. And then, you know, You've Got Mail. You throw that into, you know, she was just the queen of this era of rom-coms, and yeah, you just love her. Just immediately, you just love her.
Yeah, I had forgotten about. I remembered Rosie O'Donnell being in this movie, but I forgot about all the other actors that, you know, are very well known now. You know, including Rita Wilson, who's, you know, Tom Hanks' wife, and Victor Garber, and it's Bill Pullman. I completely forgot he was in this movie
because it's such a weird role. Bill Pullman's role in this movie is so bizarre, and he does it well, but it's so strange.
So overall, I mean, I really did enjoy this movie. I think the only thing that might hold it back from maybe this number one spot is that, and I know all movies have their kind of little plot holes and stuff, but there were a lot of moments.
Which plot hole are you going to talk about?
Well, not so much.
There's one massive one to me that I'm like, nah, but I get over it because I love the movie so much.
Okay, hold on to that. If a plot hole might be like too strong a word, but just kind of certain things of like how Hanks has like a map in his house that he can pull down and like physically show the distance.
It was the 90s, you know. Some people had maps. You couldn't whip out your iPhone and be like, "Let me show you where Oklahoma is, kiddo."
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of strange, but it's
and I didn't have so much a problem with Walter so much, but I mean, he's a little just so over the top, cringy, and I don't blame him, but you know, and it's almost even, I think, kind of convenient, kind of spoiler at the end. He's very understanding of this whole journey that that Annie is going through.
You know, I actually kind of love that part at the end when he is so understanding, just because it gives that character something, because he's just so annoying and he's just so obviously beneath her.
Yeah,
you know, and just from the beginning, you're kind of like, she's 90s Meg Ryan and you're Bill Pullman with allergies. This is not going to work.
No.
And then I kind of love that moment at the end because it gives him a certain dignity that is kind of like, oh, actually, he's a worthwhile person. He's a worthwhile character. So that part is strange, but I kind of like it just because it is a surprise and it gives him something, right? Sort of a more weight as a character. Where, like I said, through the whole thing, it's kind of like, who is this guy? Like, is she really, that's her option as 90s Meg Ryan is this dude who's allergic to everything. And
he definitely would have a Z-Pack machine now. For sure.
Yes, he would.
So what was the plot hole that
the massive plot hole for me in the movie is when she goes to see him, when she goes to see Tom Hanks, and she walks out into the road, and he walks up and he's like, "Hi," and then a truck almost hits her, and then it does this stupid cut to the map as she flies back to Baltimore, and it's like, really? There was not a single other word exchanged there. Not like, whoa, you almost got hit by a truck. Are you all right? By the way, I saw you at the airport. Like, what's going on? Isn't this a weird coincidence? Like, there's not one other thing that's said. She just like flies back immediately, and that's my plot hole in the movie, and I've always felt that.
No, I totally agree. I was trying to think, especially you kind of have to keep in mind of when this movie was made, because even essentially her hiring a private investigator to take photos of him.
Let's get it. Okay, I was going to save this for later, but let's get into that.
Okay.
Because to me is great. So, like I said, it had been about 15 years since I watched the movie. And, when we decided to do this, before I went and watched it again, I just started thinking about it, right? And I was just kind of thinking through the plot of the movie. And I was freaked out because I know in my head, I was like, one of my favorite movies of all time. This is going to be great. And then I started thinking through it and I was like, what? That can't possibly actually be the plot of that movie, right? Because if you are not watching a movie and you think through, not the Tom Hanks side, because the Tom Hanks side is grounded in this tragedy and it's all really good, but the Meg Ryan side of that movie is psychotic.
It really is.
It's psychotic. She plays a character who gets, the first thing you see is her getting engaged and going to these holiday parties with her new fiance, Bill Pullman, who's just the worst. And then she hears a guy on the radio and stalks him. She misappropriates funds from her job as a reporter to stalk him, to hire, using her newspaper's funds to hire a PI to stalk him. And then she uses newspaper funds to fly across the country and stalk him. She's a psychopath. And this movie shouldn't work at all. Not one bit. It shouldn't work.
Yeah.
But here's like the amazing thing though, is that I went back and I watched it, and that's not the experience I had at all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like you said, earlier, you told your family you're doing Sleepless in Seattle tonight, and everybody goes, "Aw." And that's what the movie delivers, right? Is this, it delivers this feeling of magic.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, if you think through the plot, it is psychotic. But in the context of the movie, Meg Ryan is not only not psychotic, she's the hero of the movie because he doesn't know that she exists.
Right, yeah.
So in the context of the movie, she is the hero who actually jeopardizes everything she has going in life to go be with this man because she knows that they're meant to be together. And I want to talk about how the movie does that because I think it's really, really interesting and kind of genius filmmaking. It just, Nora Ephron was an auteur, really.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they create that feeling of magic is absolutely incredible. You want to get into this now? I was going to save it for later,
No, do it. You're
Okay.
good. You're on a roll. I love it.
No, it just blew me away as I was watching the movie again, because I watched it once and then I went back and I watched it again because, once again, I had thought through this and it's psychopathic, and then you watch it and it's magical. So I was like, what? How do they even do that? And so I went back and I watched it, and so there's a line that Tom Hanks says when he's on the radio with with a radio therapist woman, which is, he's talking about his wife. She gets him to open up about his deceased wife. And what he says is, it was just a million little things that when you added them up meant that we were supposed to be together.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not just a line in Sleepless in Seattle. The movie actually does that between Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan's characters. Like, the movie actually gives the audience a million little things that you're seeing throughout that aren't even directly connected, but that you're seeing that tell the audience that they are meant to be together. Yeah. And it's really fascinating. Some of them are pretty obvious and some of them are incredibly subtle. Like the most obvious one, and this is, I think they make it really obvious because it's the very beginning of this quote unquote relationship, right? But it's when she's in the car listening to him talk to the therapist. Is that while she's first listening, and when the therapist is first trying to get him to open up, she says something like, well, I don't mean to pry. And then he says, of course you do. And Meg Ryan says, of course you do. And they say it at the exact same time, right? Yeah. Overlapping. So there's just immediately a moment of like, their brains work kind of similarly, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the most obvious one. That's just immediately kind of like a tell for the audience, like they're meant to be together. But then they do that again and again and again in so many subtle ways. So here's kind of one of the most subtle ones that I find really interesting is at the very beginning of the movie, after Tom Hanks' little monologue at the graveside, you then see him in his office in Chicago, right? Hasn't moved yet. And one of his friends comes up and gives him, the card for his shrink and is trying to help him out. But Tom Hanks is obviously just devastated. And then you get this little flashback of him and the dead wife and Jonah. And what are they doing? Do you remember what they're doing?
Honestly, I don't.
They're going to a Cubs game, right? They're going to a baseball game.
Yeah, baseball game. That's right. Outside,
right? And right, but here's the beauty of it is you don't really, you don't know you're seeing it, but you do. So they go to a baseball game. It's the first thing you see of the dead wife. At the very end of the movie, Meg Ryan writes him a letter, right? One of these thousands of women who writes him a letter. And Jonah gets the letter, and Jonah's like, I like her, right? And that's another thing the movie is doing to show that they're meant to be together, is that Jonah immediately connects to her from her letter. But when Jonah they finally reveal a little bit of what she wrote in the letter. And the first thing she talks about is baseball. Right? So it's this first thing you see of the dead wife, baseball. Very end, first thing that Meg Ryan says in her letter, baseball. Right? They're connecting them in these tiny little ways. During the driving scene, right, when she's first hearing him, she stops at a diner and she goes in, and the two ladies behind the counter are listening to the same thing and they're talking about him, right? And they're kind of debating like whether he's a disgusting bachelor or whether they think he would be really cute. And it's funny because it's just a side character, but Meg Ryan is there, and so it's making this connection where one of those two characters says, I bet he's got a cute butt. 15, 20 minutes later in the movie, Tom Hanks and Rob Reiner have a whole discussion about how it's all about your butt.
Yeah.
And then Tom Hanks is like, well, how's my butt? And Rob Reiner looks at it and is like, it's all right. But is it cute? Are we grading on a curve? Right. But it's just like the movie is so subtle in this way. It's just constantly bringing these little tiny connections that you don't even know you're seeing really, but they're just adding up in the viewer's mind until you 100% believe that they are meant to be together and that it's magic. Here's another one is when she's trying on the dress with her mom, right? So she tries on her mom's veil and she tries on the dress. The mom is talking about how she met Meg Ryan's dad. And she talks about how they met wherever, and then they went out on the beach and they were walking. And at one point she looks down, they're holding hands. She can't tell whose fingers are whose. So they're right. It's all about touching their hands. And then she says it was magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then when Tom Hanks is talking to that therapist over the phone, what does he say about meeting his wife?
Mm-hmm.
So I took her hand to get out of a cab and it was magic, right? So it's just like these repeating parallel things in both sides of the story, just over and over and over again. My favorite one is really brilliant. It's that scene where I think it's right after Jonah has the nightmare. So Tom Hanks goes out on the porch of the houseboat. And he's looking out into the distance.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Baltimore, right,
Mm-hmm.
Meg Ryan's character goes out on the pier and she's sitting there and looking out into the distance. And honestly, that would be enough, right? They're both sort of looking into the distance. So you get this parallelism. But they go even further than that. And what's really fascinating, if you really watch that scene, they set the camera angles. Meg Ryan is being shot from just above, right? A high shot looking slightly down, angled at her. And she's looking kind of up. And then Tom Hanks is standing, so he's being shot low up. And he's kind of looking down at the water. And they actually line up their eye lines so that they are not only just parallel sitting, looking out at the water, they are looking at each other, literally, when they intercut the shots. And it's a fantastic thing that this movie does. And it made me respect it so much more because you end up with this feeling of magic without ever really knowing why. But when you go back and put it together, it's because they are giving you a million little things, a million little reasons that they're meant to be together. And you don't even necessarily pick them up as an audience member. Not like in, the front of your mind, but it's just all kind of collecting back there. So then by the end, there's no question. Who cares if they're only on screen for 2 minutes together? 100% meant to be together.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, you talking about the conversation he's having with the radio therapist at the beginning. And you're like even talking me into really it's very understandable why the screenplay was nominated for best screenplay, because one of the first things that Hanks does when they meet at the Empire State Building is hold her hand, kind of flashing back to that,
right?
that conversation.
It's brilliant. Yeah,
yeah.
They take hands to get in the elevator.
Yeah. And I think she's brilliant too at there's the scene where he first sees her at the airport, and it had been I think a long time since I'd seen the movie, and I think she was laying these little breadcrumbs, as you mentioned, to pay off at this moment. But like when he sees her and his reaction to seeing her, Hanks is amazing in like conveying that in that moment without being too sappy or whatever. But it's been a long time since we've been watching a lot of romantic comedies that when he sees her, one, I didn't remember that he saw her at that point in the movie, but
it's
also
a surprise. Yeah.
But I also was like, oh my gosh, they're so close to each other. Like I had been, even though I know how the movie ends and all that kind of stuff, it'd been a while since I got kind of caught up in a moment like that in this type of movie.
And the dialogue right there is great too, because what he's literally saying right as she walks out is there's no such thing as a perfect person. Boop, there she is.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of just staring at her.
Yeah. Is there any other, I don't know. This movie, I would say has lots of good lines and a lot of good dialogue. I don't know about quotes. You definitely mentioned some great ones, but are there any kind of favorite quotes or scenes that you really like in this movie?
Oh man, I've mentioned this a couple of times, I think, but I was so struck by the opening scene when I watched it again.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't remember it being so heavy, right? I just didn't think it. I mean, I was, I was kind of crying like 2 seconds into it.
Yeah.
It just opened. I was just, ugh.
Yeah.
It's just, and like I said, it hits very differently when you are a parent to be hearing that conversation.
Yeah.
Mommy got sick. Like, that's really all you need to say. And that's kind of the genius of the screenplay, too. It doesn't say too much, right? There's not some big flowery monologue. Just mommy got sick.
Yeah.
Oh, just heart-wrenching.
Yeah. I really picked up on the line once again when Sam Hanks is talking to this Dr. Marcia Fieldstone.
Tell me what was so special about your wife.
Well, how long is your program?
A great one. Yeah.
I think that's a great line. Also, just from what, that line right there kind of already sums up like his relationship, even though they had that little flashback at the beginning, but that line tells us everything we need to know, about how much in love they were. But also I think this is a brilliant line because I think you could use this line in just everyday life, or like, do you love your boss? Oh, well, how much time do you have? And the person will be like, oh, and then you don't really have to actually say anything at all.
And you don't have to say how much you hate them, and then that's good.
Or love them, or whatever.
Or love them, yeah.
But anyway.
Actually, you just reminded me of another one of these little connections, and this is a more obvious one, I would say. But it's so it's right after the nightmare that Jonah has, right? So Jonah has a nightmare, and he's calling for like mom.
Oh, yeah.
And Tom Hanks runs into the room. And Jonah's had this nightmare, and then Jonah tells him that he's starting to forget her, right? He doesn't feel like he remembers his mom very well anymore. And so Tom Hanks tells him she could peel an apple in 10 minutes before that, while Meg Ryan is listening to a rehashing of the radio show, and really the attention is on her face and the emotions that she's feeling, just hearing him again. But what's she doing? She's peeling an apple in it's just all these little things. We're not even getting into all of them, but the movie does this over and over and over and over until, you just know as the audience. You just know. Mm-hmm. It's like they don't have to be on screen together.
Right. Yeah.
They're made to be together. Yeah.
Movie musings.
Do you believe in signs or fate?
That's a good question. Wow. That's a good one. Maybe not signs as much.
Yeah.
Although I love the movie Signs. Fate, yes. Signs, no. I'll say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you, I feel like I have a healthy balance. I don't think, I don't think everything's a sign. If I'm hungry, and I see a commercial advertising pizza, I don't think that's a sign that I should have a pizza. Yeah, but I do think there's things in life, and there's moments where there's lots of opportunities that seem to present itself that seem a little too like, oh, this is a little odd. This has happened so much. I don't know if you've had those type of moments before.
That. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But as one of my favorite scenes in this movie is when Rita Wilson and it starts talking about an affair to remember. She starts openly, crying about this
weeping
movie
at the table.
Yeah, and then they start mocking her by talking about how they cried over watching The Dirty Dozen. So I was wondering if a movie has ever made you truly cry or weep.
Oh yeah. Oh yes. So many. So actually, I'll tell you. So no, there's one that makes me it makes me ugly cry, and it shouldn't, but it does. For some reason, it just gets me. But no, before that though, I just want to say that's another one of these connections that Sleepless in Seattle makes, right? Because earlier in the movie, you see Meg Ryan and Rosie O'Donnell crying over the same movie, and then later on, after she sees Rita Wilson and she assumes she's the girlfriend instead of the sister, she says that she looked like somebody that she could be friends with. Right. So again, all these little connections. But yeah, as far as crying, so it's a Pixar movie. And so that's mainly what I get to watch, right? Is like kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I have little kids. And so I end up watching kids things. The movie, it's not even probably the obvious one. It's Inside Out.
No, that's actually
Inside Out makes me blubber like a child, and I have to leave the room because I start crying so badly when Bing Bong dies. I see it. I start crying. So Bing Bong, no! Oh my God, why? That part, and then the part where she runs away, and no, that movie makes me even thinking about it. I'm getting So we should stop talking about it. But that movie makes me weep like a child.
Yeah, that was.
What about you? You have to tell what movie.
Well, I am not lying. I had Inside Out as in the back of my mind. I just remember we went and saw that in the theater when it came out. and just like all the adults came out of that movie, just like streaks on their cheeks and
It
like
was so
red eyes.
dusty in that
Yeah,
theater.
and all the
construction
kids,
some other time.
yeah, all the kids just kind of looking at us like, what's wrong with you all? Like, yeah. So that's definitely the one that top of mind. Another Pixar, just the opening scene of Up between Carl, I think that's the main character, and his wife, just like one of the greatest montages ever.
Yeah,
at the beginning.
The first 20 minutes of Up are a great movie. It's just unfortunate you have to watch the other hour and 20 minutes.
Well, you don't like the
I think
bird?
I think Up is like a pretty weak Pixar movie. I know we could get into a whole other thing about Pixar, about the Pixar situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, that one, the first 20 minutes are so poignant and wonderful. That won't get me too. What about adult movies that make you weep?
Oh man, I'm not even a big animal person, but I remember we saw Marley and Me in the theater.
Oh,
and
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. But
I mean, when animals die, it's
a tough one.
Yeah, that's tough.
On a lighter note, was there a time did you ever call in to a radio station?
I have never. Never.
Oh, well, that was
have you?
That was a quick.
Not done that, no.
That was a quick answer, so I feel like I need to supplement it with a story of my own. But no, I definitely listen to the radio a lot. Not like a talk show, radio show like in this movie, but I definitely would call in to the contests that they would have. Your number, their number 7 caller or whatever. But I remember I won. It was right when NFL on Fox happened, kind of around that time that Fox actually became a station and they acquired the NFL. And so they had this like promo package, and I was thrilled because the package included a Super Nintendo game of Madden, the Madden video game. And then I had a hat with the NFL on Fox logo. And the other thing was this book, and I can't remember the name of the book or who wrote it, but it was this book that a former NFL player had written. And so I'm probably a young teenager at this time. I just remember reading the first chapter, and I mean, it's just like all the like just dark stories of like steroids and women and all this kind of stuff. I just remember my parents going like, "Nope, that book is not for you.
You don't need to read that one."
Yeah. So apparently the radio station was not concerned about my age, similar to this radio station dealing with Jonah. So
yeah, a little unethical, but
yeah.
Rom-com rankings.
You almost kind of sold me higher on my initial feelings, but 1 heart being the lowest, 5 hearts being the highest. Would you rank the romantic chemistry between the leads here? Because I want to,
and that's such a funny question in this movie, isn't it? Because they're on screen together for 2 total minutes. I'd say 5 of 5, and I would add to it what you said earlier, which is that the chemistry between Tom Hanks and the son is equally wonderful, and that's a really important aspect as well. I'd give it a 5 of 5.
Yeah, honestly, this is my podcast, right? I can change my feelings. I mean, honestly, you kind of sold me on the 5 heart. There's lots of moments now that I've been connecting as you were talking, and once again, I just, even the short time that they are together, you do feel it. And I mean, a lot of that is, like you said, has been built into the screenplay, but I think a lot of it really resides between the 2 actors, that you just see that connection. I think especially because of he's not necessarily cynical in this movie, Hank's character, but like, he's apprehensive. And then you see how all that drops the moment that he sees her. And so I think that definitely
without really any words or anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, you just see it. It's really well done.
Yeah. So the second category, also kind of different. I've always labeled it as the best friend or friends. I kind of think there's a lot of best friends in this movie.
There are a lot of them, right? Yeah. There's Rita Wilson and Victor Garber and Rob Reiner all on Tom Hanks' side. On the Meg Ryan side, it's more just Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you rank this component to this movie?
I mean, I'd give it a 5 of 5 again.
Yeah.
And Rosie O'Donnell too, to me, I think she's a pretty great best friend character actor. I mean, Beautiful Girls. Have you seen Beautiful Girls?
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah.
All right, cool. She plays the best friend in that, basically.
Yeah.
And she has this killer monologue. If Kyle ever listens to this, he will know what I mean. One of his favorites. But yeah, she's a classic like best friend character actor who just kills it. And Rita Wilson with the whole monologue, like you said, about An Affair to Remember. So great. And then Rob Reiner with the comedy, Yeah, he does great, just with the randomness. Yeah, he kind of disappears halfway through the movie too.
Yeah, he does.
You never actually see him again after somewhere about halfway.
Yeah, well, he worked together with Nora Ephron and When Harry Met Sally, so that there's that relationship there. But yeah, you do feel a little bit like he's like, all right, Nora, I can give you 2 days. And she's like,
then I'm out. I've got better things to do.
Yeah. I agree with you. Also, 5 hearts. Not just Rosie O'Donnell's performance, but all the other supporting characters. Just because they support the main characters kind of in their quest, even kind of push them towards such things for sure. And then also they're memorable in this movie, but they don't steal the scene. They don't steal the scenes. Like,
that's a great point.
Yeah. We talked about it a little bit, but the soundtrack.
5 of 5, easy 5 of 5 for me.
Man, it is great. It's one, and I've listened to a lot of soundtracks lately because of this podcast, and I really like from track 1 to the end. Like they're all great, and they just these songs just have a way of just not just wrapping you into the thinking about the movie, but just honestly, if you're ever feeling down in life, I think listen to the soundtrack, and it surely will kind of bring a little bit more pep to your step.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's it's used so effectively within the movie too. I mean, the use of Back in the Saddle Again when he's trying to call for the date, that's just great.
It is.
But yeah, the use of Bye Bye Blackbird, it's in that scene. It's when they look at each other, but they're not really looking at each other. They use the music so effectively.
Right. Yeah. The fourth category is the chase scene / declaration of love. Kind of a.
Does that even exist in this one?
Well, it kind of sort of kind of. I mean, Hanks is definitely chases his son, to New York City.
I mean, that's that is a good point.
Yeah, it gets him. So I kind of do envelop into this like ending scene, and like for me, I mean, it's 5 hearts. I don't know how much romanticism was revolved around the Empire State Building before this movie, but I can imagine all the Valentine's dates or proposals that have happened there since this movie.
Oh, infinite proposals.
Yeah,
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to undercut the rankings. So I gave it 5. What did you give it?
I'd give it 5 as well.
Okay.
Yeah, well, you convinced me on that one. Yeah, because I was kind of like, does it even have? But it does. You're right, because he has to chase Jonah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Weird, right? Really kind of just twisting the convention of it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to. Okay, so I'm going to kind of branch off a little bit here. A couple of notes I had that I knew you would probably kind of delve on a little bit. A couple of things with Jonah and Tom Hanks here. When he tells Jonah to shut up, that kind of like hit me hard in the moment. I can't imagine. I can't ever imagine saying shut up to one of my kids. I don't know. That might just be me, but
yeah, I know. Well, it kind of No, you're exactly right. It's pretty jarring.
Jonah, the fact is, you're not going to like any woman because it isn't your mother.
How do you know? What's wrong with Annie?
Oh, Jonah, shut up!
Shut up? Shut up? Mom never said shut up to me. Mom never yelled at me.
conversation is finished.
Why can't we go to New York?
There is no way that we are going on a plane to meet some woman who could be a crazy, sick lunatic. Didn't you see Fatal Attraction?
You wouldn't let me.
Well, I saw it.
At least for me, put it in the context of the way that they're playing the relationship, where they're like so close, and they have this banter that, you know, is so intimate and connected, but also pretty sarcastic. And, you know, it kind of just goes with that whole situation where Tom Hanks is like yelling about like how he hasn't even slept with very many women, but he's going to get laid this weekend. And then Jonah comes back. He's like, how long have you been there? And then he's like, and Jonah says, so I forget what Jonah says. Then Tom Hanks remembers another woman he's like, 7, Mary Kelly. You know, they have the relationship that's so close.
Yeah.
And also like, so I don't know, they're almost like friends, but obviously there's a parental thing as well. But yeah, it kind of fits in all of that with me.
Yeah.
And I think you can also phrase it as, you know, he's a guy under duress, right? So, you know, being in that situation of having to deal with all that.
Yeah.
Probably you could crack pretty easily. At least I could. I feel like,
yeah. Another little moment too is is when he comes home and Jonah's friend Jessica.
I love that.
I'm like, okay, where are the other parents here? The fact that he just kind of like leaves.
No, that's such a great. I love the moment when he leaves and he's like, he feels like he should give them privacy because he's kind of confused, and so he shuts the door. But then he comes back and he cracks the door open again because it's just so weird.
Yeah. So
I love that moment too. I love the
I could say that in that moment they're probably too young to worry about maybe such things as if they were teenagers, but still the parent side of me was like random kid at my house,
it's a strange child here.
Yeah. Okay, another third just parent aspect to this movie. How mad would you be if your child just got on a plane to New York City?
I think I would be furious, but then the sheer terror
yes.
of that would overtake that. And if they were alive when I got there, I think I would do just what Tom. Yeah, I love Tom Hanks's dialogue there too. Like when he just runs up and he hugs him and he's like, "We're doing okay, aren't we? Aren't we doing okay?" And he's just like, he's not sure at that moment. Maybe they're not doing okay. Like maybe they're just deeply not okay. I love the dialogue, I love the delivery. But yeah, I would be terrified.
Oh man. Yeah, it totally be that moment of like, just pure anger, but also just pure relief and love at the same time, but I honestly, I thought Jonah got off pretty easy.
Well, Jonah was right though. It was like, Annie was the one. So, at a certain point when you're like riding down the elevator with Meg Ryan, it's like, Jonah, I'm going to give you a pass on this one because it kind of working out.
In fact, Jonah has just that to lean on the rest of his life. If anything happens, he'd be like, introduce
Dad,
you
remember
to Annie.
when I introduced you to your soulmate?
I mean,
you're going to ground me? Really?
Yeah.
That's what's happening?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I have I think I can guess what you give the last category, which is the rewatchability factor of this movie. What do you give it?
Oh, a 5 of 5, but like a surprised 5 of 5 because a lot of movies from that time period don't hold up at all.
Yes.
Surprisingly so, right? A movie even that I think will hold up and I watch it again, I'm kind of like, ooh.
Yeah.
Movies that I really love at the time sometimes don't hold up. I tell people that about Inception, right? I'm a big Christopher Nolan fan. I watched Inception recently. I was kind of like, I don't think that holds up at all. Actually.
Yeah.
And so, but I was kind of shocked at how well Sleepless did hold up. I felt every part of it. Yeah, I was like, this is amazing.
I hope you don't hold it against me too much. I still feel like I give this like a 4 out of a 5.
I do hold it against you.
Okay. Because despite the despite all the magical moments that you have reminded me of,
The magic, Nathan.
There's
Remember
still,
the magic.
There's just still some things, as is probably I've seen too many movies in life. Maybe I'm too cynical, but just the moments of like her, like in the little cupboard with the phone, and Walter like catches her, and like there's still kind of these like those little the scene that you mentioned with the vehicles, and then all of a sudden there's little aspects
When
of
she's just
that.
back in Baltimore somehow magically. Yeah.
But
yeah.
But like you, I was a little surprised at just how warm and comforting this movie is, for sure.
It is, yeah, right. It's still, it maintains that like aw sense to it.
That's a perfect review of this movie. Oh,
Sleepless in Seattle.
Yeah.
Recommendations.
I know you have young kids, so you may just be in the world of Pixar and other animated films. But
yes, in My Little Pony, if you want to talk about My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, I could talk about that for a while.
Yeah. Is there anything you recommend that or not just watching, but maybe listening to? Or...
I can tell you my 2 favorite movies from last year. How about that?
Yeah.
2 favorite movies from 2022. Honestly, I haven't seen much this year. But my 2 favorite movies from 2022 kind of surprised me. Both great in very different ways. Banshees of Inisherin.
Just loved it.
I don't know if it sent me down a rabbit hole of
Yes.
research about the Irish Civil War. Absolutely incredible. Love that movie. I think it should have won the Oscar. But that's just me. And I'll admit I have not seen Everything Everywhere All at Once yet. So,
okay.
In fairness, I've heard really wonderful things about it. So I have not seen that one. But my other top favorite movie, if you just like action and want to see something really freaking fun, is Bullet Train. I love Bullet Train.
Okay, I have to watch that. Talking about signs, you're probably about the 4th or 5th person that's told me to watch Bullet Train. So it's a sign. It's a sign, Miles.
Great. No, and I think it's probably pretty telling of what I admire in movies. But like Bullet Train does a really great job of sort of a similar thing to what Sleepless in Seattle does, which is giving you these little moments that all add up at the end, right? Of like who Brad Pitt's character is, like as a person, but also kind of like as a symbol in the movie. It's fantastic. It's so funny. It's so fun. The acting is really great. It's just one of those movies that's really, really fun.
Okay, well,
you have to watch it.
I have to watch it now for sure.
Oh wait, hold on. One more. Yeah, sorry, not to interrupt, but this movie is from a couple years ago, but I always like to tell people about it because it came out right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it went straight to video. Actually, maybe they tried to release it in theaters and it just utterly failed because it was like late 2020. Okay. Like who was going to go to a theater in late 2020? And it's the movie Love and Monsters.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
It is shockingly good.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Dylan O'Brien, who he's not like a big name, but he was the dude from the Maze Runner movies.
Oh, yeah.
And he's so charming in this movie, and it's just got a great sort of simple story, really pretty darn good CGI for what it is. And it's just such a fun movie. I always recommend it to people because it's just one of those, it went totally under the radar. Nobody really knew about it, but I watched it and I just sat there like, this is so fun and amazing. Which is just kind of, Banshees of Inisherin aside, like I often just, I want a movie that's going to be like fun and entertaining. And
yeah, actually nominated for Oscar for Best Achievements in Visual Effects. So
there you go. There you go. I know, but in 2020, did people even watch the Oscar? Did people even know the Oscars existed in 2020? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, my recommendation is kind of one of the movies that's out right now that's real hot that I had a chance to go see, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse in IMAX.
Great things about that.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So
I've heard that it puts basically all live action superhero movies to shame, to the degree that people are like, why would I go watch a Marvel movie after this? Like, this is
And I'm not necessarily someone who's like, I'm not. I mean, I watch plenty of animated films and are open to them, but I mean, the things that they are visually doing in this movie are pretty outstanding. So despite all the movies I've watched, I also haven't watched tons of 2023 movies, but I can already tell you
I feel like not that many have come out this year. I'm sure I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like, I don't have any in my head that I'm like, I want to see that.
It's been a lot of, no surprise, just a lot of franchise type of movies and sequels. So like Fast X came out. I'm just someone who hasn't seen the Fast and Furious movie, so I'm not going to go see the 10th one. I heard a lot of good things about John Wick 4. Also, like I've seen the second one. Just now these franchises have gone so deep that like if you've missed any of them, you're kind of like, well, I'm not going to jump in at the 7th installment of this movie,
It's
so
true,
that's kind of the hard thing.
But, I think all the other John Wick movies too, I've just watched at home. Like, they're really cool, but they're not necessarily one that I associate with having to go to a theater for necessarily. Actually, here's a movie I want to talk about. I want your take on it before I say anything about it. And I'm sure, well, I'm not sure that you've seen it, but I'm guessing it's a really good probability because it was one of the 2 biggest movies of last year. Top Gun Maverick.
Yes.
I want to talk about Top Gun Maverick.
Okay.
Because it made like $2 billion.
Right.
And people loved it.
Yes.
What did you think of Top Gun Maverick?
Oh, we really enjoyed it in the moment.
Did you see it in the theater?
We saw it in theater as a family in IMAX, and I haven't in
IMAX even. Okay, I think that's important.
Yes, I haven't seen it since then, but we just really enjoyed it. And honestly, I'm not someone who just grew up loving, adoring the first movie, Top Gun.
See, I am actually. I like that's one of my childhood movies that like probably had a bigger effect on me than maybe anything else.
Yeah,
movies,
but and I know it's cliche to always say they don't make movies the way they used to or whatever. But it was the first movie in a long time that I thought was very entertaining, but also cheesy. But it packaged the cheese and like it just reminded me of early '90s action movie like The Rock or Con Air. Like it had these moments that
put the bunny down.
Right. It just had these moments of like, there's literally a moment where someone's staring off into the window and it's raining outside, and somehow it still all works somehow. So anyway, but I mean, I thought it was extremely entertaining. But
it's so. I did not see it in the theater, and I think that's like a big differentiator with that one, because I think that if you saw that in the theater, like the last 40 minutes in a theater, I can only imagine are like just the most thrilling and amazing thing possible.
Yeah.
Because the last 40 minutes are killer. They're amazing. But I will admit that just watching it at home on TV, my wife and I were sitting there and I had heard nothing but great things about it. I'm a huge fan of the original Top Gun.
Yeah.
And we're sitting there, we're like 50 minutes in, and I'm like, I turn to her and I go, does this suck? or is this me? Or is this terrible? And it's just like the cheesiness. I think when you're watching it on TV, like the cheesiness is heightened in a way.
Yeah.
Where it just didn't play for the first hour or so. Like, I mean, they have an important conversation. He and Goose's son have an important conversation while in a inverted dive, spinning around each other. But the dialogue is hackneyed and terrible, and like it's like, you gotta let go of the past, guy. No, you have to go let go of the past. You killed my dad. And it's just kind of like, what am I watching? This is so dumb. And I think probably if you're in a theater or something, it like the grandness of the cinematography and everything else takes the edge off of that. But it's just a funny thing to kind of think about the different ways that people digest movies now. Yeah. Be it at home on your TV or in a theater or on your phone. I mean, how do you even make a movie that's going to play on all these different things?
definitely seeing the one thing that stood out to me in the theater, and I know there were visual effects like they were utilized in some form or fashion, but there was a practicality of the movie in a lot of the flying scenes that I hadn't seen like in this, in 2020 to 2023 in a long time. And so that was something that I really liked about it too. It felt, and especially in the IMAX theater with the sound and everything, it was, I mean, even to the point that afterwards, like Whitney, she loved the movie, but her head hurt a little bit after. She was like, I have a headache.
Sure. Yeah,
I have a headache. And I'm like, yeah, because we've had like rumbling sounds.
There were giant woofers like destroying our brains for the past 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always like to talk about that one because I was so ready to be so impressed, and it was just a very different experience on TV.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I jokingly said when we watched it, and like I said, it's been a while, so I can't quite remember. But at the end of Top Gun, he had the picture of him and Iceman embracing at the end, and I think there's a similar moment at the end of the sequel. And I kept on going, "Who's this photographer who's like taking these just precious moments?"
The aircraft carrier photographer. Every aircraft carrier has one.
Just assuming that, just maybe Maverick's like pinboard is legendary, and he's like, Maverick has to have this photo. Anyway,
I'm going to take this one in black and white. It's going to be really artistic. They really leaned heavily into the nostalgia in that movie. I don't know. I kind of thought it was almost detrimental at a certain point. Like at the end, like Goose's son is like, "Talk to me, Dad," but they never set that up.
Yeah.
So it's like you get, as an audience, you get it, but then did they earn it? I don't know. Yeah. I could go on and on, but I think if I had seen it in a theater, I probably would have a very different experience with it.
Right. Yeah. Well, next week on the podcast, we're sticking to the 90s, and we're going to explore the depths of love again, but also explore the depths of death with 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which comes in at number 14 on the best rom-coms list. Miles, it seems like people either hate or love Andie MacDowell. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I love 4 Weddings and a Funeral. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Tune in for that one, people. That's going to be a good one.
That's going to be a good one. As always, check out moviesorlife.com for episodes, reviews, and more. If you love this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. This really helps us with finding new listeners. And thanks again, Miles, for coming on. I know you have young children, and it's hard to watch movies and then also, edge out some time to talk about said movies. So I really appreciate it.
No, they're in bed now. Yeah. This is my time to drink and on podcasts. There you go.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can meet in person, either in South Carolina or on the top of the Empire State Building. I'll let you choose.
There you go. Yeah, I choose Empire State Building for sure. Yeah.
All right, man. Take care.
All right. See you, Nathan.